our fourth. Sorry, this is our fourth session of the Starters Assistant Call Room Event Leaders session. Today we're going to pick up on some of the questions that came out of the last session on September 29th, and we're going to sprinkle in a few questions that we received when we did the initial survey of your thoughts and wishes last summer. So should be a good show. We've got some good questions and we've had some very good answers. Oh, sorry. Now, what does everybody see?
Yes.
Just a sec here. There we go. Excellent. Okay. So 6 questions we're going to cover today, time permitting. If there's a good discussion, some good comments, we will continue, and then we're going to try and cut it off at an hour. We'll pick up the remaining questions at a session we'll do probably late November. These questions and discussions are targeted at national and international type meets in Canada. You may want to do some of these procedures at provincial meets, but they're targeted for definitely at national and international level meets. So the 6 questions, we have starter assistant signals at World Athletic International meets and Canada-wide. I'll take a first stab at that, and then Keith Newell is going to pick up for the rest. Ian Fisher is going to talk about the spikes and the types of spikes. Keith will come back in and talk about the size of starters assistance cards. Jennifer is going to cover off false start indicators on the lane markers. A good question from Louise last session. I'll touch on club logos on competition gear, and then Jennifer will pick up and close with TV cameras in the call. So we'll jump right in with the first question, which was, at the Tokyo Olympics, I watched the SA officials on the track and their movements. I noticed that they didn't use hand signals, but took a step back to indicate the athletes were ready to go. Who decides the signals and why are there differences? So I thought that looked really sharp on the TV for the Olympics. Actually took me a while to figure out how the SA signaled these starters, but it looked just like theater. Everybody was in sync, it looked really sharp. So Jane Edstrom gave us some feedback on this question. So the start team just has to agree on the signals to be used at the competition. This international starter, start referee, start coordinator, and chief starter's assistant will cooperate and agree on the protocols for the competition. As long as the team is familiar with the protocols at hand, then all's good. Communication obviously is key, whether it's verbal or other types of signals. Everyone has to be on the same page. The World Athletics rule book, there's no mention of SA signals. So no rules, but the start team needs to agree up front. In Tokyo, everybody followed the procedures. It was really good to see. But it's most important that everybody knows and follows that. So next, Keith is going to talk about what we should do in Canada for signals. But before I leave this topic, is there any questions on what we've just covered?
It's Val Gordon. Hi, I was the one who posed the question because I know, again, you kind of explained it's more international world athletics, but that has always kind of been my bugaboo, even nationally or province to province, is even then everybody's slightly different on what they want to do. And that was kind of, I talked with Jennifer about this, like it'd be nice if at least if I know I was doing a meet at Winnipeg at a university level games, it's the same across the province or across the country. So yeah, you've answered the question great, but I would say, especially for young officials, and when I was being mentored or evaluated, you know, depended who was doing it. Everybody wanted something different, which is fine, but be nice to be uniform for sure. That's all.
No, yeah, I think Keith is going, you took the right intro for what Keith is going to cover off. The only dimension we're adding on, you'll see it through several of the questions or the responses today, is it's the, for lack of a better term, it's the show concept of what do we do at these larger meets for the show. But with that great introduction, I'll turn it over to Keith, and Keith can give us some insight or direction on how we should be doing it in Canada at the national, international level meets. Maybe you want to bring it all the way down to provincial and club. So Keith, turn it over to you. Just let me know when you want me to advance the slide.
Thanks, Brian. First of all, if you've noticed or watched the Diamond League, every different country seems to have a little different procedure. So Canada, actually Val said that, you know, when she was mentored, she was given different information by a variety of people. The signals we've come up with in Canada, I basically through Jackie Downing and then a number of others, and they've been around for quite a while. They were supposed to be across Canada. I'm surprised if you're getting different information from different people. The in any size of meet, that like provincial championship, the bigger ones, not the JD meets, the junior development, you should always decide with your group, and that includes the starters, chief starter, what exactly the signals are going to be, and include the announcer. And if there's TV, they usually have somebody on the playing field, on the track, as some kind of a director, and they usually get into the conversation as well. So it's good to know what's what. Anyway, there's if you notice in the rule book, there's only one signal that they suggest the starter assistants use, and that's letting the starter know that all is ready. There's about 5 things starter assistants are supposed to do, but the one is signal. It's just is everything ready? Yep. Okay, go ahead. So there's nothing really hard and firm. So the ones we've decided on for Canada, and they should be Canada wide, I don't know why they aren't, are, as Brian's going to show you with a few slides here. So let's go with the first slide, Brian. Hello, Brian. Thank you. So track is closed. This is usually just the starter, the chief starter's assistant or his designate will walk out, center track, hold up his arms, explain to the athletes the track is closed, and if necessary, warm-ups off behind your blocks. And also if there's a line there or 3 meters behind your blocks or behind your line. Quite often, most tracks seem to have the 3 meter line back of the start line now, but if it's not there, tell them 3 meters. Otherwise, it's just the assembly line. This signal also is very helpful to announcers because when they see that, they know you're getting prepared to start the race. So if the announcers know that this is the signal we're using, then they're happy with that. We used this way back when at the World Championships, and it worked fine. I'm trying to remember at World Juniors, I didn't see much in Moncton just because I was call room referee, so I couldn't stick my head out from under the stands. So I didn't see what was used there, but that's the standard signal. Next slide, Brian. Again, stand behind your blocks. Some people may put both arms up, but just with the arm straight out and a verbal. Now remember that at World Championships, you tend not to talk to the athletes because there are so many different languages required, and anybody who doesn't understand English is feeling left out of the game and maybe feels you're giving information that they're not getting. So as far as the verbal commands go, I skip them and use this as the signal to get behind your blocks. Next slide. Warm-ups off. Usually I just tug on my shirt. I do this and tell them, and then sweep your hands below to indicate you want the warm-ups off. Hot weather, probably this is an unnecessary signal if they've already got their warm-ups off when they've been warming. We have always said, don't say sweats off. It sounds a little crass. Well, suit yourself. Warm-ups off is the easiest. Next slide. This, I don't know where that starter assistant is standing for the photograph. Richard, where were you standing? Doesn't matter. Looks like you're going to be long jumping in a second. Usually by this time you've moved to the side of the track. Once you see the athletes that follow the directions, you move to the side of the track to whatever position is. If you're in blocks and it's a staggered start, you go to whichever lane you're assigned. Usually the chief is in lane. Well, Ontario likes 3 and 4. I like 1 and 2 as a chief. But it's 1 and 2 I find is easier just to look down the road, the 3 other starters assistants if you've got all 4 of you, and see that everybody's ready at the same time. Watch the signals come down. Once you get the signals from the other assistants, then you give the signal to the starter. As long as you've communicated with them beforehand, they understand that that's it. If the announcer sees that, they know that all is ready. Of course, you usually have to wait till the announcements are finished before you can give the signal. Once you give the signal, you've turned the race over to the starter. You no longer have any control and don't say anything. You do your job. Next slide. The only job you really have, if you notice something the starter hasn't noticed, for example, I don't know what the problem is here, the person is in the blocks, but if they have, let's say, both knees are well, you have to have one or both knees on the track. Well, if neither knee was on the track, you might want to let the starter know if he's already had them and thinks everything's ready to go. You don't say anything. Put your hands up. If the starter decides to ignore you and start the race, so be it. But you've done your job. Again, your job is not to say something unless there's a huge issue. For example, if, say, a set of blocks slips, they've already started, you want to wave your arms and tell a recaller, but hopefully beside you or close to you, to recall the race. Hopefully they see it also. You'll notice also, thinking of recallers, that in the States and a number of other places, the starter's assistants carry guns or pistols. This in Canada, we've agreed not to do. And so you don't have any control over the race. You're not a recaller, you're a starter's assistant. We've separated those two. Also, in a lot of cases in Canada, the start coordinator's job is almost turned over to the chief starter's assistant, since we're the ones usually that confirm from the announcer, from timing, from anything else that's a wind gauge operator, whatever, that all is ready to go. So again, if you have a start coordinator, you have to confirm between the two of you who's going to give the signal that everything's ready to the starter. Or they signal you, you signal the starter, but you work something out between you. Now, as far as Japan goes, what they did is fine. I notice in some countries, all they do is walk behind the blocks to see their feet are in the blocks and nobody looks at the fingers on the line. In the 100 meters where it's a straight across start, I find a starter assistant and the chief on one side and the other can usually check. You look down the line, you check your 4 lanes, you can see the feet in the blocks, and you can see the fingers on the line. We don't have to move around, we don't have to walk behind. So I think that actually looks a little better than walking behind the blocks. Also, I don't know if you noticed, the American Olympic trials, I think it was, the recallers for the 400 meters. Anyway, 400 meters looks, they had a walk each. I think there was 2 of them. So they walked at least 4 lanes, and then the other one walked 4 lanes. So by the time they got everything ready, I think that set position was probably going on a full minute. And with 4 starters assistants, each taking 2 lanes, it's quite a bit faster. I know the athletes do not like to sit in the on your marks position for a long time. Similarly goes for 800. I think 1 or 2 starters assistants is ample because the amount of time they have to stand on their marks and wobble about is less. The fewer people have to look after the things. Anyway, that's all I want to say. I guess there's a question I saw pop up. We'll go from there. All yours, Brian.
And so, well, there was a comment from Dave on that photograph. The foot wasn't in contact with the plate. So
That's the correct answer.
good call. Good call. Stick those hands up. Any other questions or comments for Keith? A lot of years of experience and wisdom there. Any clarifications or comments?
The years, yes. I don't know about the wisdom.
All right. Well, anything for Keith on that?
It's Val again. I'm going to be asking lots of questions. So in Saskatchewan, what we do is like signal the starter, and then the starter assistant stands with the chief with their arm horizontal from their shoulder, checks fingers. Then when they see it, they drop their arm and move behind the start line. So that does not happen or does not need to.
I wasn't quite sure what happens. So normally, if we're talking about an echelon start, like a 200 or a 400.
Everything. Every race, when we turn it over to the starter, they'll say on their mark. So as soon as I turn it over, I guess my right arm is straight out to the side from my shoulder, check toes, and
yes.
drop my arm, and then that's when they know they can do the gun. Same as
Yes.
same as at
But
the
if you
100.
have 3 other people, the chief has to watch that they drop their arms. So they're ready to go before
Okay.
the chief actually finally drops their arm.
Okay, that's the signal that you didn't have there. Because you just had turning it
yeah,
over and
that's
then
true.
stand up. Okay, nope, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, I saw David has his hand up.
Yes, I was just going to comment, as a video referee, there was one occasion in 2019 where we saw the athlete not having both knees, or not having one or both knees on the track, and the starter's assistants did not notice that. So we were the ones who alerted the start team that this was an issue that needed to be dealt with immediately.
So you're saying you were doing everybody's job, David?
I was trying not to, but I was, yes.
Yeah, no, that's somebody's got to let them know. So if the starter assistant miss it, they missed it. And it's good that somebody else is on the ball.
So Dave, how did you notify them? Was that by radio or?
That was a good question. The question for David was, how did you let them know in the bunkers that you saw something wrong? Was it like real time?
We had audio connection with the start team. So we were able to contact the chief starter's assistant and alert them that there was an issue.
Okay. Just further to that, did you have control of the cameras to say, just hold there on lane 4 for a sec?
No.
I didn't hear your question, but if I understood it, it's, did we know which camera, which lane it was? And yes, we did. And so we alerted the starter's assistant team, and they went and talked to the athlete, and it was resolved fairly quickly.
Okay, that was my question. Yes, thank you. Any other questions, comments for Keith on SA procedures? I don't hear any, see any. So thank you, Keith.
Moving on.
Thank you for that. So now we're going to move over to Ian. Ian's going to
talk about spikes.
Ian's going to talk about spike types.
Yep.
that never-ending discussion over which type of spikes are allowed, and he'll forever settle the debate.
Okay.
Ian, are you there? Or Jennifer, sorry, you'll go as Jennifer, but just
Yeah,
let
I'm
me
here.
know
Can
when
you-
you want to advance the slides.
Can you hear me, Brian?
Just, you're in the bottom of a well. Do you have can you raise your microphone?
It should be okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes,
Go for it.
you can hear me.
Yes,
Thank
perfect.
you. Okay. Yeah, as far as spikes are concerned, the type of spikes, the key thing is that we read the technical package, and hopefully the athletes have done that beforehand, because the type of spikes that are allowed should be in the technical package. And it's critical that you know that and they know that. And the thing regarding that, you need to be able to identify the different types of spikes. And if you go online, there's just a plethora of types of spikes. Sometimes the names are interchangeable, but basically there's two types of spikes. There's ones that permeate the surface of the track, and others that compress the track and do not puncture the track itself. It's critical that the technical director or the meet director, or sometimes it's even the municipality that owns the track, they will say what type is used. Because if you use the wrong type of spike, sometimes the warranty on the track could be null and voided. So that can raise some kinds of problems. So I think we have some pictures of the types of spikes on the screen. Brian, next. Thank you. Okay, you can see the three on the right, actually the four on the right, B, C, D, and E are considered compression type. A is a pin spike or needle, which will permeate the track. B, the pyramid is pyramid shape, but the top of it is actually blunted and not as sharp as the needle type. Number C is a post. We don't see those too often. And Christmas tree and modified Christmas tree. They're called trees because they're tiered. You can see the top of them is flat or blunt, and they just compress the track. Now of course, we know in the manual too, the length of the spike is noted, and in our rule book we need to have our spike gauges. Right, to determine or to measure the length of the spike, and also the width of the spike halfway up, the length of it. Now that's a little bit nebulous. How do you determine what's halfway up the length of the spike? It's kind of you have to eyeball it. It's supposed to be 4 millimeters, but okay, I think that's pretty clear in a way. So again, I recommend or encourage you to go, if you go online and do some research on the type of spikes, or go actually to the manufacturers of the tracks like Mondo, Tartan, Ricotan, Plexitrack. There's a lot of different varieties of tracks, and see what the manufacturers actually recommend to use on their track. At the Olympics, I guess Mondo's had the license for that since 1976. They provided the tracks for all of the Olympic Games, and their maximum they recommend is 6 mil. And only pyramid or Christmas trees. You're not supposed to use pin spikes or needle spikes, as that will puncture the track itself. Ricotan, which is the other option, that's the one that's has a little granular surface, and they say no needle spikes, and they just say pyramid spikes too. The thing, doing research on tracks is quite interesting too. If you go onto the Mondo site, and they'll explain how the actual tracks are made, and how they're constantly updating them, and it's really interesting. The concern that I have with Mondo in certain climates, Mondo is laid down in strips like a carpet, and the seams are glued together. And if you're in a very cold climate, lots of snow and ice, and you get a little tiny hole in the track, that can break down that seal, and eventually the track can form some deformities, as opposed to Ricotan, which is laid down in one big layer. I think basically those are the two types of tracks that we have in Canada. Indoors, you may have a slightly different. We have one in Richmond. It's a Plexitrack, and you can all use ceramic spikes in that. So, okay, next.
Ian, you're a bit choppy on the sound there. If you can get the microphone closer to your mouth.
Okay, I'll do that. Thank you. Okay, so these, you can see the tree spikes on the left, and this particular, they're saying not, they're banned, and the needle ones on the right, the ones in the middle is a pyramid spike. So I'm not sure why they're saying the compression spikes on the left are, they don't want them. So Athletics Canada really shouldn't be making the recommendation. The recommendation should be coming from the meet director or the person who knows the particular track itself. You can't make a blanket statement like this they have on the screen. Next. Technology stipulate what height and size, right? It's important. It's stated in the athletics, of course, it has to be. Yep. Next. Okay, purpose, great. Traction by penetrating. I question that first statement, right? If you penetrate the track too deeply, there'll be friction when you're withdrawing the spike out of the track, which is actually technically can slow you down. Okay, spikes can be metallic or ceramic. Spikes can impact the state. Yep, hence different types of spikes for different kind of meat. One thing we don't look at very often too is the type of spike in the starting blocks. I have seen more problems with the track at the start lines of 100 meters where the track actually gets torn. Especially you get your senior athletes, the big powerful people, the blocks slightly move back and forward slightly, and that can do a fair bit of damage to the track. Again, of course, if we use spikes that are too short, sometimes we have block slippage, and you may end up having to have somebody stand on the back of the blocks or use another set of blocks abutted against them. I've seen that at some NCAA meets. I thought that was quite interesting. Didn't realize what they were doing at the time. You take the pads off and just use the rail and butt it right at the back, so you get twice the number of spikes out on the track, and that it saves having people stand behind the blocks, which it's not a good perception. Okay, next. There you go. Type of spikes. I'm going to read that to you. Okay, needle point, slimmer design, sink deeper. Okay, that's technical stuff you can read on your own, and I recommend that you go online and do some reading about the different types of spikes. Okay, next. Pyramid, same. Less damage to a synthetic surface. Okay, next. Never seen these spikes in athletics. This type of spike can be used. Oh, cross country. Yeah, cross country. There's no restrictions to meets. The athletes depends on what they want to use. Depends on your surface, of course. If it's compact trails, if you're on the mixed course, sometimes it's a little bit of an issue. If you're on grass and mud, then you're on gravel. That's an issue. But as a starter's assistant, we're not concerned too much with that. Okay, next. Compression. That's the type we talked about before. They're tiered and they don't puncture the track. Just comments on the Mondo track from Tokyo. I know Carson Valholm, he was talking about that, and he was pretty excited about it. He says it's like running on a trampoline. You get the rebound off the track surface. Online, there's a great form on the track itself, the Mondo track, and how they developed it and how it's made. So it's very interesting. There. Okay. Oh, there's a question at the bottom. I guess the ceramic spike, I guess it's a little bit smoother. I'm not sure how that works. I know I said before in Richmond that they were only allowed to use the ceramic spikes. Yeah, I don't know the technology behind it, so I can't really answer that question. That's my supposition. Okay, next. Number of spikes, yeah, 11, any position you want. Okay, those are all in the rule books. Hopefully you're reading your rule book. Okay, next. There we go. Track manufacturer. To me, that's the key thing. And the meet director, the technical packages, it must reflect what the stadium operator is doing. Okay, hopefully they have a little bit of knowledge of track too. Now, of course, as starters assistants as well, levels 3s and 4s, we probably have more experience down on the track than many of the meet directors. So you might, strong arm and make some recommendations to them. what seems to be a better spike to be using. Okay, next questions. Okay, I just want to, before we have some questions, just refresh yourself, of course, in the call room, knowing you have to be able to identify the type of spike. As well as that, you should have your spike gauge. I recommend you have a spike wrench. You should some pliers or some vice grips. And I really encourage you to have extra spikes. Now, some extra legal spikes. I know some people, oh, if a kid comes without the legal spikes, they can't use them. Well, tough. Well, we're here to encourage kids to take part. And even at the Canadian Championships, the story from the Worlds in 2001, Keith and I and two ladies were at the start line. Australian sprinter comes to the start line in his flats, no spikes. I said to him, where's your spikes? They took them away in the call room, he said. They weren't legal. Now, how somebody from Australia gets to the start line in the World Championships with illegal spikes, I don't know. That just boggles the mind. It's a little bit like that 4x400 meter US runner in Tokyo that lined up outside the zone. How could they do that? Anyway, that's another story. Okay, questions?
Yeah, I just have a question of Ian, just a reminder to everybody that hopefully the meet technical manual has the spike length and whatever style they require in
Right.
the manual, because otherwise the call room becomes a horrendous mess, because left and right spikes are getting, say, well, go back and get some new spikes. Sometimes if the guys are doing the meet or on top of it, they want a certain spike, they supply a whole bag full of the things that you can actually get, and guys changing their own spikes.
Yep.
That's all.
Definitely. No, for sure. Well, if they're technical package for nationals, I mean, that should be published well in advance, and it should be noted too. So again, most athletes nowadays, I mean, at the higher international level, they all, I hate to say they all know.
Yeah, I think the shoe declaration might clean some of that up, just because every athlete has to declare their shoe before the meet starts.
Absolutely. Good point. Okay.
Any other comments, questions for Ian?
Oh, I saw Heather had a comment or question about having inserts on the outside of the sole. Remember, in the past, the kids would have little plastic inserts that were screwed underneath the spike, I think, on the little flange that attached them into the sole. And that was a little bit of a controversy too. The rule book says as long as they're made of the same material and the overall thickness does not exceed the rules, my feeling is they were legal. They don't have to be actually molded to the sole itself. They could be added afterwards as long as they do not exceed the thickness of the sole and they're of the same material. However, other people disagreed with that one. I don't think we're getting that much anymore with the new spikes, but it could be an issue.
Okay. Any other questions, comments on that? Who would have known spikes were so technical? So much variety.
Okay, thanks, Brian.
Okay, well, thank you, Ian. Another very knowledgeable presentation. So next, the next question goes back to Keith, who's going to talk about the size of those SA cards, Starter's Assistance cards. So Keith, back to you.
Okay, thanks, Brian. As most people will tell you, size doesn't matter. Anyway, I think in cards it might be a little. The book says A5, which I believe is 5 by 8. I don't know if you can see this. And I'll flip my screen on. I don't know if you can. Anyway, that is, I don't know if you guys get this technical rule book, that type that's in a ring binder. And that's what I use if I have to use it most meets, just because it's handy. It's already with me in the rule book, and it's only 4 by 6, I think it is, or 4 by 7 maybe. I think it's close to 7. Anyway, I think the size really is not that significant. I know that's when you see it on TV and a couple of the Diamond League meets, and I think in the Worlds, they had great big full 8.5 by 11 sheets. So like obviously it was for the show. And remember that World Championships and those Diamond League meets and Olympics, it is a show. So be prepared to go to the show if you're there. I can remember that a couple of times we were reminded that don't make us look bad. Us being at that time it was the IAAF, now it's the WA World Athletics. So that's it. Don't make us look bad. That's the thoughts from what you're doing as officials. And I recall there was the competition manager or their competition person from World Athletics, who's no longer there, a great guy, but he would have been happy if he didn't see any officials on the field. He always figured that we're trying to run a meet here when the officials get in the way. Mind you, it doesn't say anything for the photographers, all the media, other people that wander around them. Sometimes look terrible. That's it, as far as me goes. You have any more slides on this? I can't remember. As far as the rule goes, it doesn't really matter as far as I'm concerned. It's got to be visible, that's all. Anyway, you can read this. The only thing is on these meets, as this note says, it's got to be visible to whoever needs to see it, including the audience. So the bigger, the better, I guess. Oh,
Here's another one.
One other thing, as I won't direct this at Ian, but as starters assistants, we're not referees. So the 2 cards at the top are referee cards. The ones at the bottom, the 3, are starter assistant cards. And of course, the one in the middle of the diagonal half, black and yellow, is strictly for combined events, because the false start rule is 1 and you're done. At combined events, of course, it's 1 to the field. And then after that, anybody or everybody can get disqualified. The green card, of course, you all know is everything's good. We can restart this. Just to give the athletes an indication there was no charge. Oh, if you do have an issue about thinking of the referee cards, if you have an issue about somebody's actions on the track, whether they be being silly or refusing to cooperate or whatever, that's when the referee should step in. And if you have to, you should have a start referee there, wave them over. I don't think it happens much anymore, but the only time is when they refuse to leave the track after they've been given the black and red card. I haven't seen that happen in any high level meet for a long time. Yes, no, see, Dave has a question there.
Yeah.
Yeah, yellow and black is used for U16. Depends on where you happen to live, I think. I think we have U16 in BC is 1 and you're done. The only people that go with a 1 false start before you're out here is junior development, which is you under 14 and under, I guess I do, under 14.
Maybe misspoken, Keith. I couldn't remember 16 or 14.
Yeah, well, I don't, that's what we have. Anything else?
So Keith, in BC, and I assume other areas, I believe most of the starters assistants create their own cards through various ways of laminating. If we were using something different than what, or in that rule book you showed, how would that happen? Would the meet director or the ITO or someone come along and say we need full scap size cards, or how, do you know how that would happen? We're going to probably show up with our own cards, right?
We would probably show up for, I think if I was invited to work at a very high level meet, then it might be a different story. I would probably go about creating my own just to be on the safe side. But the bigger they are, the harder they are to fit into any bag and sort of put in your pocket if you need them. So
Yeah.
that's
Nice
the thing I
windy
have to-
day, rainy day, yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
it says in the book A5, so I would go with A5 and then argue with somebody that said they want it bigger. That's like a
Oh.
big recipe card, I think, isn't it, an A5?
That's a British thing, isn't it? A5?
I don't know. That's, well, it could be because that's where the
You
book
did,
comes
there
from.
was a size here, just a sec. I can tell you the size. There it is.
There it is. It's
Eight.
stationary.
Oh,
8.5
no.
by 5.5, yeah.
So there you have it. So yeah, looking at the chat here, people tend to make their own, or they have that one in the back of the rule book that I believe most officials in Canada get that rule, get that that type of rule book. Okay. Any other questions for Keith on the size of essay cards? Okay, well, thank you, Keith. Thank you for that. So we'll move on to our next question, which is going to be, Jennifer's going to take this one. And it's the false start indicators on the lane markers, a question from Louise at the last meeting. Jennifer, do you want to pick up on this? Let me know when you want to advance the slides.
Okay, you can advance this slide.
You already covered this? Okay.
No.
Well, okay.
Took it over.
Basically there's two rules. One in the World Athletics, which is 16.9. One in the World Para Rule Book, 17.9. And basically lane markers that provide for it are being used whenever a card is shown to the athletes responsible for a false start. The corresponding indication should be shown in the lane markers. If you advance the slide, please. Basically, the lane markers don't have these metal flags or 3 slots or 3 holes. I remember these way back when I first started, and that's a few decades ago, that an SA, once the card was shown, would put up either a metal flag to the corresponding color or a flag was put into a slot. With time, I think that World Athletics has taken the format, it's a show. We don't need this extra activity behind the lane markers. So I haven't seen them in a long time being used, but they were used way back when. Okay. And who is next?
Any questions for Jennifer on that, the lane markers?
Yeah, I think Jennifer, just most of the modern lane marker boxes, which are now molded plastic, don't have anything that you could affix a flag to.
Yeah.
Or
there's
even a
nothing.
hole to put one in. There's nothing there. So I think that's why it's just fallen by the wayside.
Yeah, and it will get into the look of the show if extra people are in the TV screen. So, all right.
Okay. Yep. Anything else for Jennifer on that question? Okay, well, hearing none, we'll go on to the next question, which is club logos. What is NOC's interpretation of club logos with respect to advertising regulations of World Athletics? Does a club logo, e.g. Canadian Track, constitute the athlete sponsors part? So I have 2 responses here, one from Jennifer and one from Jane. So on behalf of NOC, I'll give you their interpretation. Basically, if Athletics Canada is hosting the meet, then it's their call, their decision. Jennifer has had experience at seniors and juniors where they've placed the bibs lower so that all the photographs, the media coverage For newspapers and TV, you can see where the athlete is from, the province, the club. It's important for the athlete or the coaches to have the club's name, sponsors out there. It's it's all part of the marketing. So Jane says that the club logos on the uniforms, that's Athletics Canada question. But basically, you want to give them the ability to have visibility for their province, club. So if you can lower the bid somehow and do that, but within the context of making sure it fits within the Athletics Canada direction. Any questions, comments on that one?
Yes, this is Ian Reed calling. So this was my question that I'd submitted, and coincidentally enough, about 5 hours after I sent that into Jennifer, Athletics Canada asked me to be the referee for the recent 10K Roads Championships that was in Toronto. So this was part of the Toronto Waterfront Marathon event, no marathon this year. Last few years, it had been a World Athletics silver level race, and my understanding was I wasn't involved in those races, but my understanding is that World Athletics was making a policy that every kind of logo, including club logos, was applicable to the rules, and so they were restricting club logos on that. So I had heard about that. I asked this year Athletics Canada when they appointed me referee what their view of that was, and they threw it back to me and said, well, whatever you think, this is what we would suggest, but it's your call. I agreed with their call, which was what Jennifer's answer was here, and that basically club logos are not commercial in the context of the advertising or sponsorship rules, and so we weren't going to worry about those. We had the shoe and uniform inspection at the technical meeting the day before the race. So there was one exception to the club rules, and that's the Running Room Athletic Club. The logo for that is the Running Room logo. So I interpret that as being a commercial sponsorship type logo. So we had the black tape, and so in those cases there was about 4, I think, people running under that affiliation. So there we applied tape over the Running Room logo part, but I did leave visible the athletic club text beneath that. So I figured that it was still, at least if anybody wanted to make the logical guesses in terms of what the club logo was, but we're still keeping in compliance with the advertising rules. But other than that, weren't worrying about any of the club logos that were larger than the 40 square centimeters.
Never clean, is it?
No, I mean, I initially thought once I got the answer from Athletics Canada that no, they're not worrying about club logos. I said, okay, it's very simple, just deal with commercial stuff. But then all of a sudden people are presenting the Running Room Athletic Club logos, and it's got the big Running Room logo on the front, and figured, yeah, that doesn't quite qualify.
Yeah, makes you squirm a bit. Oh, that's good. That's a good comment, Ian. Thank you for that. Anybody else want to add to that, or anybody else want to add to that? Or another question?
So can you just clarify again about sponsors? So say Molson Canadian sponsors an athlete and they've got the big Molson logo on it. Is that acceptable?
So I think that was Dave. Dave, you were really quiet.
Sorry. I had my microphone moved.
Okay.
Sorry. Okay. So the question is so say Molson Canadian sponsors an athlete or a club, whatever, and is it okay to have the Molson's logo on it?
Well, I'll toss that out. I bet you that's a good one for Jennifer. As soon as you have
I
more
will.
stuff.
Sorry, this is Ian again. I would classify that in the same context as the Running Room Athletic Club, in that it's a major brand name that's the club name or club logo, and in that case, it wouldn't be kosher with the advertising rules.
And I totally agree with Ian Reed's comment. It has to be covered because it's not a sponsor for that meet.
Okay, so stick to provinces, running clubs, and schools.
How about an international beer mile? Are there restrictions on the label of the can or the bottle?
Is that World Athletics
Only
sanctioned?
Ian would view
It
that
may
one.
be in the future. Who knows?
I think David's going to answer that one. David, you got a hand up.
Yes, but not for that one. I was just going to present an issue that was quite interesting. It happened at the European World Para Athletics Championships. And there was an athlete at the start of the 200 who wanted to start without a number on his breast or the front. And he said he was never issued one, but the video evidence showed him ripping the number off his front prior to getting into the starting blocks. So he ended up being disqualified for not wearing the number as given.
Wow.
So I don't know if there's any discussion on that, but that's what happened at that competition.
Never had a number before, I guess, eh? Anybody want to weigh into that?
Yeah, just a reminder to everybody that, of course, if you're in the call room checking numbers, that numbers have to remain as they're given. You can't fold them, bend them, whatever, to sort of make them smaller or make them, I've seen them crinkle them up, but they still look like they were given to them as far as all the advertising or whatever on the numbers. So that's all.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else on,
You can't-
sorry, Jennifer?
Yeah, you can't start a race that is run by an organization without that. If they're issued, bib numbers have to be put on. He takes it off, that's it, or she takes it off. It's DQ, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, that's, let's get to that level without a bib.
Yeah, the other thing, if I can say, I remember that with Commonwealth Games way back when, and even Athletics Canada, any advertising that's conflicting with their meet sponsors gets a big no-no. So if that kind of advertising shows up, it's definitely a list that, like, that's assume it's a list that doesn't even have a question to it.
So have your duct tape with you in the call room.
I was going to
Okay.
ask Ian, did the black tape stay on by the end of the marathon?
Was the 10K. I'm not sure. I didn't get a chance to take a good look at the finish line. There was one guy that for some reason that the tape was just not sticking it at all on before the start line. So I mean, I did have to provide last second another set of tape to go over it, but I believe it came off within meters of the start. But I don't think there was the other one. So I don't know if that one guy's singlet was different or he had some special sweat that was going on that was making it not adhesive. But no, from what I saw the tape, I don't think there were problems with the tape coming off. But that's going to be very dependent on the specific type that's used.
And the humidity of the environment too.
Yep.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? Well, I've got an hour. We're at an hour now. We have, I would suggest, I'll look to Jennifer for a nod on this, but that we defer the final topic, unless Jennifer, you think you could squeeze it in a few minutes.
I think I can do that, Brian, no problem.
Okay, all right. Well, Jennifer's going to cover our last question, which is TV cameras in the call room. Over to you, Jennifer.
Thank you. This is a question that Ian Reed presented. And all I can say to start off with, please remember compromise, okay? Next slide. Okay. We asked David, Jane, and Louise. David was up in the video room, so he didn't see any cameras down in the the call room. Louise didn't see any, and this is Jane's position on the subject broadcast from the call room. It is common at the World Athletics. It is a human interest component, as long as the cameras are not intrusive and it is acceptable. Next slide, please. I've had the opportunity to be the chief call room judge, and these are my, I call them my parameters when I'm thinking and going to talk about TV cameras in the call room with the competition director, the technical delegate, the meeting manager. These are my factors that I want to take into consideration. First, what is the size and the layout of the call room? What is it going to look like? Number two, I won't budge on. The safety of the athletes and the call room staff is very important. The call room has to be a place of calm where athletes can gather themselves. Okay, it's also a place within 10 minutes, we are to have all the athletes for an event that is going out inspected. Okay, another factor is, where are the washroom facilities? I really don't want cameras seeing that athletes entering washrooms and coming out of washrooms. Okay, so that is a key point. All those factors make a key point that you have to be, if you are the call room chief, to be involved with the planning committee, the competition committee, at least a year or so in advance, because it's an important decision that has to be reached at. Next slide, please. My preference is to have the cameras outside the main entrance and the exit area as they're coming in. You see them coming in. They did that in Toronto. I had a camera was installed up there. They could see them coming in. There was a camera watching them as they were coming out, but those two cameras were done remotely. There was not an operator. They were up in the ceiling, so it was all good. Also in major competition, the walking room, walking from the call room to the assigned gate where the athletes enter the main stadium also have cameras, which we had in Toronto. So hopefully from these positions, the viewing public can get an idea what happens in a call room. Next slide, please. Now my feelings, I got to take into consideration. I don't want extra stress on my call room staff. I don't want the athletes to have stress. To have a camera crew physically present in the call room, I think would add some stress because they know, or they're being told through their headsets to get the stars of the meet. And so they would be moving around the call room, making a beeline to, for example, I'll use Usain Bolt. He's in there, let's go get a shot of him. They would not have their focus on my staff. They would have no focus on the safety of the other athletes. They would have the focus on the star athlete they want to get a picture of. Next slide. Now this one, I have to thank Jane. She took this picture when she was in Doha. Camera crew in the call room. This is very, very tight. You can, the athletes are squished in. There's no two benches, two seats between an athlete being seated. There's the call room pod leader in there. I just find it very, very tight. And you notice all the signs on the walls and everything else. So to me, this would be stress, in my opinion. Next slide, please. Now, having said all the above, it is your job when you become a call room judge, you are the chief, you must work with and accommodate the host organizing committee and the host broadcasting company on this point. And as the chief, you have to be prepared to compromise and hopefully so is the organizing committee. So you can run a safe call room for your staff, for the athletes. You can provide an interesting perspective of what happens in a call room to the public. So those are my points on the call room. I don't know, I don't think there's another slide after that. I think that's the end. But I do have to thank a couple of people. Ian Reed, Renee Van Dahl, Ian Fisher, Keith Newell, Val Gordon, Jane Enstrom, David Weicker, Louise Buskus for all their questions and suggestions. And I have to thank Richard Whitten for being my model for those pictures that you saw in the signals, but I just realized it was drawn to our attention. We missed one, so Richard, we're going to have to go do some more shoots. We're going to have to do a photo shoot. So thank you, and thank you to Brian for organizing this. Back to you, Brian.
All right, before we sign off, is there any questions on that TV cameras for Jennifer? There was a
Sorry,
few.
Ian again, sorry, I just had a quick comment. So that the shot that she had from the Doha one, so that's one that I screen grabbed from the CBC feed. And actually further to that, since that that was on the video feed and it's got a camera there, that shot there was also taken by another camera. So there was two cameras basically right over top the shoulders of the call room personnel and right in the face of the athletes. So
Wow.
whether that's cool with the athletes or with the staff or how that's going to be run, that I guess was the driver of my question.
And my answer would be, did you see anyone smiling there? That
No.
is too tight.
Yes.
That is too tight. And my job is to make sure, like coaches have given us these athletes to come through, to stay safe, to get out of our call room to the stadium and to perform. And if anything happened, they would be very upset, whoever is the chief call room judge in this instant. So that is why I say we have to compromise, but safety is paramount.
It's going to be
Just a-
chaotic if you're doing the 4x1 relay and you've got cameras in there and all the athletes. It's just they're all practicing their entrance skit. Yikes!
If I could add something too, the athletes tend to use the first part of the call room where they're putting on spikes, whatever. It's a change room, so it's a little, I guess, could be a little embarrassing for them
Cover
as
your
long
eyes.
as and us.
Yeah.
Actually in World Juniors, I remember a certain African country, the girls took their tops right off and put on their singlets, and for all to see. It was a little strange, but you never know what's going to happen there.
One other point is also, I prefer when I do a call room, we have a controlled check-in gate. So athletes have to come through that gate dressed already in their singlet and their shorts, and they can be carrying their shoes and their sport bag and their sweatsuit. But they have to come in basically nearly 95% competition ready, dressed in their official uniform of their country for this meet. Okay. And that cuts down a lot of stress in the call room area with all this crazy changing and everything. And I remember that incident. Okay.
Anything else? Okay, well, that we covered our questions off. Thank you for just letting us go a few minutes over time, but we got through them all. We do have some more questions for our next session, including a good one from Ian Reed on the roles and responsibilities of call room staff. We'll cover that in the next time, but it's what the differences or the rules between the referee, the chief, and the judge. So we'll get back to you on the date for the November session, most likely later in November. So great discussion. Well, before I sign off, is there anything else people want to say before we wind up here? Any last words? Okay, well, as on the thanks side, I also wanted to thank Jennifer for pulling the slides together. Big job on the research and putting everything down. So, thank you to Jennifer as well. So good discussion. We'll pick it up again in November. Keep the questions coming. You can send emails. You see the addresses on the screen. Send them off. We'll get them addressed. So until then, take care and we'll see you soon.